Chapter 5 of The Mandalorian was a funny experience for me. Basically, it's my least enjoyable episode, but at the same time, it contained many elements of the things that I like, not only about Star Wars, but about the show itself. So it's left me feeling weird. But rather than just moan into a microphone or blame people for my own personal feelings, let's talk about what happened as the show unfolded, and what I did like about it and what I didn't. And we will start with the positive. First off, the opening of the show was visually stunning. It was classic Star Wars, a classic Star Wars dogfight, straight down to the filming technique used in the old films. The Mandalorian is evading another bounty hunter that's after Baby Yoda. This guy even uses the phrase, "I can take you in hot or I can take you in cold." And I guess that's a common saying in the Bounty Hunters Guild. Even though the Mandalorian's ship has taken severe damage from the other bounty hunters' attack, the Mandalorian ends up pulling a maneuver to get behind the other guy's ship, stating out loud, "That's my line." He annihilates the ship, and the screams of the bounty hunter was actually kind of terrifying. When people die in their ships in the movies, it never seemed that scary, but now it did. So perfect 10 for the intro. Because of the state of the Mandalorian ship, he was forced to head to a nearby planet, Tatooine, and from here it's basically like a one-to-one recreation of scenes or areas that we have seen in the original Star Wars film. We are back in Bay 35, we see the cantina, we walk around Mos Eisley, and all of this looks legitimately amazing. However, I oddly felt underwhelmed at parts while seeing it. We're also introduced to Bay 35's mechanic, who wasn't a bad actress or anything, but the choice for her to have Sigourney Weaver's haircut from Aliens was a bold move. It was super funny to me, but overall, I did like the character. To get his ship fixed, the Mandalorian needs credits, so he needs to find work. And he leaves Baby Yoda asleep in a compartment, which, for me, as a dad, was insane. It shows us that the Mandalorian has a lot to learn about taking care of a kid, which even the mechanic states at one point. She ends up only truly working on the Mandalorian ship once she realizes there is a child in there. So, the Mandalorian walks through Mos Eisley, and we come across the Stormtrooper helmets on spikes, which I originally figured was going to be some compound of anti-Empire terrorist groups or something. But it's just the corner to the cantina bar that we are all familiar with. However, I do like the violent implications of what happened to the remaining stormtroopers on Tatooine after the fall of the Empire. That in and of itself could be its own video. Inside of Mos Eisley's cantina, it's both familiar and also new. A droid actually tends the bar, which to me was very funny knowing how much Woohair hated droids in the original Star Wars. But at the very least, it was pleasing to see the bar again. And here's where I felt the episode begin to feel off. And mostly this is due to a character called Toro. I flat out don't think this individual was good in this one particular role. It didn't work for me, and I get the idea that it's an homage to Han Solo or Dash Rendar, but for me, it was like a super duper diet version of both. It felt a bit too pandering, but overall, I got the idea, of where the episode was heading immediately after we meet this guy. Mando will help this young gun, and the kid will betray the Mandalorian, etc., etc. And that's exactly what ended up happening. How we end up in that situation was actually pretty fun. And side note, it looks like Toro was holding some emblem of the rebellion, which I initially did find interesting. But regardless, the character overall just took me out of the experience of enjoying the episode. So while in the cantina, Toro overhears that the Mandalorian needs work. And initially, Toro acts cocky, saying he can help him out. But ultimately, Toro is trying to get into the guild, and he is on his first assignment. So when the Mandalorian learns that Toro is tasked with taking in a mercenary named Finnick, he's like, "Yeah, see you later, kid." And Toro straight up begs for his help. He offers all the credits on the bounty for the Mandalorian's assistance. And finally, the Mandalorian accepts. What I found interesting about this exchange was that the Mando is familiar with Finnick. She's worked for all the top crime syndicates, including the Hutts. And if you know me well, you know that I love the movie Solo and Crimson Dawn. So here's to hoping that we get some more nods to that. Now, a very strange thing that happens after the Mandalorian Mandalorian accepts the job is that Toro breaks the fob so that the Mandalorian can't take it. My only conclusion is that Toro's fob might be on the Mandalorian himself, or it's something deeper that's maybe going to play out in the further episodes going on. Then again, I tend to seek out deeper meanings in things that aren't really there. So it was just a curious moment to me, and it raised some suspicion about Toro. Before his quest to find Finnick, the Mandalorian heads back to his ship realizing that Baby Yoda isn't where he left him, and he gets into this frenzy until he realizes that he's in the care of the mechanic. And again, overall I like the character. Initially she comes off as only wanting, money to fix the ship, but we find out through her interactions with Baby Yoda in working on the ship before payment that she's a good person. I'd say the highlight of this episode was everything having to do with the speeders. Although this episode was super heavy-handed on fan service, I still appreciate how dedicated the writers and directors are to keeping up a sense of realism in the show. Toro and the Mando are on speeders heading out in the desert to find Finnick, based on Toro's knowledge of her whereabouts. And during this journey, they come across Tusken Raiders, which I thought was handled very well. We see some banthas, then we hear the classic shrieks of Tusken Raiders, and our Mandalorian begins bargaining with them using sign language so that they can have safe passage through the Dune Sea. He trades binoculars, and then they go. In my opinion, I think the Tusken Raiders gave the Mandalorian the time of day based off knowledge of what Mandalorians are. Warriors, hunters, people with honor. It's similar to how Tuskens operate. I do think there are some legitimate parallels between Tusken Raiders and the Mandalorian for sure, but I really liked this part of the episode. I've waited forever to see Tusken Raiders back in live action. They are one of my favorite things from the OT. Now, Toro and the Mando head back out on their journey to capture Finnick, and then they come across a dewback. Again, this episode doubles down with the familiar. The dewback is dragging a dead bounty hunter behind, which ends up being bait. Finnick is hiding, trying to snipe anyone out who comes after her. She even gets a bunch of shots in on the Mandalorian in the episode. But now that he is donning Beskar, he is basically invincible against everything except Cara Dune. Toro and the Mando have to wait it out until nighttime, where they can use flash grenades to distract Finnick while approaching on their speeders. And there's a little joke with Toro and the Mando sleeping before this begins. We think the Mando is, sleeping while Toro's testing out his gun draw, and he's just saying dumb things out loud, but the Mandalorian is actually quietly observing, and then asks, "Are you done?" I thought that was perfect, and it got a laugh out of me. So now that it's night, they take off, blinding Finnick with the flash grenades. It was all really, really epic. She ends up taking down the Mandalorian speeder bike, but he gets one more flash grenade in, helping Toro get to his destination to basically be a distraction to Finnick. Finnick straight up kicks Toro's ass when he tries to take her in, but this was the Mando's plan. Use Toro as his own distraction, then sweep in with his guns drawn. The Mando makes Finnick cuff herself, and during this, she reflects that it's been some time since she's seen a Mandalorian, and then brings up the planet Navarro, which is the Bounty Hunters Guild planet, which immediately implies that she knows who this decked out Mando is, and why he's on the run. Plus, the Mandalorian was told that being in that armor itself was going to draw tons of attention. He's basically a walking target. So, due to the lack of transportation for all three people, the Mandalorian ends up searching for the dewback from earlier, leaving Toro and Finnick alone, which clearly was only going to result in something horrible. Finnick tries to buy her way out from Toro, saying that she can pay double the bounty, and that Toro doesn't realize that his claim to fame in the guild would be taking in the Mandalorian. Realizing that he carries an asset that the entire guild is after, it would turn Toro into a legend. Toro appears to take the bait like some naive kid. He's walking up to Finnick to uncuff her so that she can help him, but then he point blank shoots her, and he seems to have killed her. The shift in Toro's character was dramatic. To be frank, it's probably the best scene with him in the episode. Now the Mandalorian arrives back to where he left Toro and Finnick, only to find Finnick on the ground with a blaster going right through her body. It's hard to say if Finnick is playing dead or not, but to be frank, if this is all we get of this character, I'm going to be really bummed out. And here, the Mandalorian, realizing what is going on, goes back to Mos Eisley. He sees the speeder bike parked near Bay 35, and we end up in our standoff against Toro and the Mando. Toro has the mechanic and Baby Yoda at gunpoint. He tells the Mando that he's going to bring him in, and essentially solidify himself in the guild. But the Mandalorian is also always one step ahead of everyone, and I liked that the mechanic was saying to the Mandalorian that he's smarter than he looks, as she realizes what he is about to do. I think that's funny considering we never see the Mandalorian's facial expressions at all. The Mandalorian has another flash grenade in his hands, and as he is getting cuffed by the mechanic, he uses it to blind Toro, basically like a ninja vanishing. Toro can't see anything after the fog clears, but boom, the Mandalorian shoots him down, and he releases Baby Yoda to safety. Finally, the Mandalorian takes all the credits off Toro's death dead body, and he gives them to the mechanic for all her hard work, watching Baby Yoda and dealing with this altercation. And then our guy and Baby Yoda takes off again to some other place, knowing that no matter where he is, the guild is closely behind him. And we get another one of those head nod shots that Filoni seems to be obsessed with. We got the same head nod shot in episode 1 with Kuil. I just find that humorous. It's like the classic 80s style acting head nod, if that makes any sense. And the last official scene of this episode plays out like an after credit scene. It just gives us a glimpse of what's to come. We see the dead Finnick still on the ground, and maybe it's early dawn, and all we see are legs walking up to the body. It sounds like a bounty hunter tuning in some radio signals, etc. And then this person kneels down next to Finnick, and it cuts to black. We don't see who it is, but I think it's only suggesting that someone important is on the Mandalorian's trail. Who this person is anyone's guess. But I hope it's not Boba Fett, because I legitimately do not care about Boba Fett beyond his portrayal in Empire. He was great in Empire Strikes Back, but just let him be dead. And the other thought I had, although this man doesn't have a cape, would be maybe it's Greef Karga. And that's about it. Chapter 5, The Gunslinger, was by far my least favorite episode. The writing wasn't spectacular, the directing wasn't spectacular, the acting wasn't spectacular, but the music and the visuals and the attention to detail on what Tatooine should and would look like years after the fall of the Empire was a perfect 10. Even if this show was kind of boring for me in a story sense, it's still nailing an aesthetic that I call pure classic Star Wars. So what did you think of this chapter? I'm sure there will be a lot of varying opinions on this one because it's Dave Filoni not only directing, but writing. And I hate to say anything negative about the guy, but I have not been really that impressed with his live action debut all that much. But I hope that going forward, at least for me, he brings a more thought out approach to his live action storytelling. May the Force be with you, and AT-AT is signing off.